Here. All right, so good morning. Thank you all for joining us today for this Navigating College Prep session. Today we're focusing on FAFSA and financial aid and some of the changes and just really diving deep into it to give you all a better understanding to work with students. My name is Samantha Jackson and I'm one of the career readiness consultants at Kent ISD. And again, thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Just a couple of reminders, I know I just mentioned, but please make sure that your name on Zoom is the name that you registered with or something similar, just so we can make sure that you get credit for today. This session is available for college sketches specifically, so that's what you'll get for attending. We will have a short break after kind of the first part of it today, but yeah, so we will just jump right into it. So today we're joined by David DeBoer from Grand Rapids Community College, who works in financial aid. And so I'm going to turn it over to David and let him introduce himself.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm David DeBoer, Executive Director of Financial Aid at Grand Rapids Community College. But a little bit about myself first, that I am actually trained as a high school English teacher and taught out in Muskegon at a small private school out in Muskegon for a few years in the late 80s, early 90s. And then in 93, got into higher ed and started getting into financial aid. So I've been in financial aid since then. I have worked at 4 different higher education institutions here in Western Michigan. So all of them in Grand Rapids here, Kuiper College, a small school. Then I was connected with Calvin Seminary for a while. Davenport University was a majority of my career, about 15 years. And then the last, not quite 3, almost 3 years here at GRCC. My time started at GRCC just as the pandemic was gripping the world. And so I thought it was a great time to change jobs and started my career remotely. And then I did not meet my full team for about 1.5 years in person because of that. But yeah, so I've been in financial aid, not quite 30 years, but pretty close. And seen all these changes in that. I will touch on later this morning on some of the changes in the FAFSA that are coming up. So what I'm talking about mostly this morning is going to be the current FAFSA for this coming fall. So the FAFSA that people would be filling out if they were to log in today. We'll talk a little bit about how that's going to change for the fall of 24. But the new FAFSA is only 11 months away, but there will be a lot of information coming out in the future there. So yeah, I have a presentation that pretty much focuses on the FAFSA for about the first half of this morning. Then we'll take a short break and get into more of an interactive, like talking about how to connect with parents, how to connect with students and get the FAFSA completed. And then also, hopefully we can have some breakout rooms where you can share with each other some ideas. Because let's face it, when it comes to trying to get students to do something, when it comes to getting information out to parents, there's no one way that's just going to work. It's all different ideas that'll kick in. So with that said, I am going to do a quick little screen share and get started here. And I can still see the comments, but hopefully if you have a question, you throw something in there and I can talk about that as we go along. Hopefully you should be seeing my presentation. It has a blue screen right now that says what you need to know about financial aid. So I did share this with Samantha. So along with the recording, you'll be able to get this presentation in PDF. So to get started, this is what the agenda is for this morning, a brief conversation about timeline, and then more in depth about the FAFSA and different types of financial aid that students have access to. And then the second half of the morning is focused more on these strategies for communicating with parents and students. So timeline, The FAFSA becomes available October 1 of the year prior to the fall start. So fall semester is starting, fall of 2023. So depending on the school, it might start in late August or early September of 2023. And so the FAFSA becomes available October 1 of the year prior. So the FAFSA for next fall is already available. Students can go out. In fact, GRCC and other schools, other colleges and universities have already done different FAFSA events across the state to help students complete it for next fall. So you can fill at any time, and for federal aid, the FAFSA can be filled out anytime, like that first paragraph says, anytime between October 1 of 2022 all the way through June 30 of 2024. If a student is eligible for federal aid, which would include a student loan as a possibility, if the student is eligible for aid, they can fill out a FAFSA pretty much any time from October 1 through June 30 of the end of an academic year. And they would be able to have access to federal aid. However, the state has a different rewarding priority deadline. So March 1 of 2023 is the priority deadline for some state programs like the Michigan Competitive Scholarship or the Michigan Tuition Grant. And there are a few others, but it's best if students who reside in the state of Michigan to fill out their FAFSA prior to March 1, even if they're not sure, like the Michigan Tuition Grant, as an example, is for students who are going to a private school like Alma, Olivet, Marygrove, Calvin, Hope, schools like that. So the Michigan Tuition Grant, students have to fill out the FAFSA prior to March 1. So even if students are not thinking of a private school like that, maybe they're convinced and they're certain that they're going to go to a community college or they're going to go to one of our four-year public universities, that's fine. I would still encourage them to get that FAFSA done prior to March 1, just so that they have options available to them. College deadlines. Each college is going to have its own deadline for scholarships. So for instance, at GRCC, our scholarship application opens December 1 for next fall. And I know that there are other colleges, especially four-year colleges, that do some early awarding in December and into January. So if students are looking at schools like that, they should be looking on the school's website to see if that school has certain deadlines for their own scholarships. So it's just kind of a general timeline. The main thing is that if a student misses the March 1, they do not fill out the FAFSA, and now it's, just pick another date, July 15. Still, that student would fill out the FAFSA because they still might have access to federal aid, or they still would have access to federal aid, and they might have some state eligibility for some of the programs that do not have the March 1 deadline. So that's just a timeline moving into the FAFSA overview. And I start with what is financial aid, because that kind of gives a reason why the questions are on the FAFSA. So financial aid consists of funds provided to students and families to help pay for post-secondary education expenses. That is a definition right from the federal government. So it does not say grants and scholarships. It does not say any restriction to, it does not exclude loans. It says consists of funds. So that includes everything from a grant or a scholarship to a student loan. All of those are considered financial aid because the federal government says they're financial aid. And it's to help students and families. Therefore, that's why parent questions are on the FAFSA unless students are of a certain age or if they're married and they are independent of parents. But that's why the parent information is requested on the FAFSA, because the federal government says that they expect that students and their families, in other words, parents, are helping to pay for secondary education, post-secondary education. The other thing is that it does not say it's going to cover 100%. It's going to help the families pay. So therefore, student loans help students pay, even though eventually the families have to pay a student loan back. So that's just kind of the context of financial aid and why the FAFSA has the questions that it has. So types of aid, and I've already hinted at some of this. There's this general concept of gift aid or free money or money you do not have to pay back, grants and scholarships. And then the government calls student loans and employment, they put that under a general umbrella called self-help. And the reason is that the student has to do something. So student loans, the student has to pay it back eventually after they are done with higher ed. With employment, it is considered a form of work study. It's called work study, a job in work study, but for the student, it's just a job. It is considered a portion of financial aid, and so it's awarded based on the FAFSA. But from the student's perspective, they're simply working on an on-campus job or maybe even an off-campus job with a nonprofit organization. They're simply working. They're getting a paycheck, they're getting taxes taken out of their income, all of that. So from a student's perspective, it's no different from working at Meijer or at some restaurant or who knows what else they might be, where else they might be employed. What happens with work study is the federal government gives money to the schools and the schools use that money to pay students. But because it's coming out of this huge bucket of federal financial aid, a student on-campus job or work study is considered a portion of financial aid. But like we're finding with what's happening in the employment sector today, and kind of as we emerge out of the pandemic and change in terms of employment, and that students are finding the opportunity generally to get a higher paying job outside of just work study and getting a job on campus. They might find it more convenient to work on campus because it's right with, you know, they don't have to travel as far. They can work around their class schedule a little bit easier. But those are the general categories. Scholarships and grants they get based on GPA, SAT score, something like that, or based on the FAFSA. Loans or employment, they have to do something. Loans pay it back, employment, they have to work. So it all starts with a FAFSA. Even state aid, even most institutional aid starts with a FAFSA. And the FAFSA is an acronym for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So that's where FAFSA comes from. And actually, that some people will say FAFSA, you know, but that it's not the free application for student federal aid, it's the free application for federal student aid, so FAFSA. The website is studentaid.gov. And the emphasis on free, because actually back in the 80s, some schools actually charged students like a processing fee, like a admissions application fee or something like that. Some schools across the nation charge students like $10 to process an application for financial aid. And the federal government said, no, you cannot do that. So in the late 80s, early 90s, the federal government said, no, you cannot put a barrier between a student and their ability to access a federal benefit. And therefore, they came out with the free application for federal student aid. And therefore, every single school has to provide assistance free of charge to students. So like my income at of people like me at Grand Valley, Western, Lakeshore Community College, you name it, any other school that participates in federal aid, I get paid through regular tuition, just like faculty, just like other employees at the school. There's not a charge for people to access federal aid. I emphasize that, and actually a lot of us in financial aid emphasize that because students should not pay, even like a scholarship search. If they are searching for a scholarship and some scholarship says, we have a $5 processing fee, the student should leave that website and go search for a scholarship that does not charge. But yes, it all starts with a FAFSA. So this screen kind of shows you the different sources of types of aid, but the FAFSA covers most of the primary sources. So the biggest source of financial aid is the federal government. So the FAFSA comes from the federal government. And then most states, so the state of Michigan, they use the FAFSA to begin the awarding process for students. And so students have to fill out the FAFSA. Once they say they're the residents of the state of Michigan, the federal government sends the information to the state, and the state will determine eligibility for state aid. And then colleges and universities will use the FAFSA as well to begin awarding institutional aid. Some scholarships don't require the FAFSA, but a lot use the FAFSA. A lot of schools use the FAFSA to get the process rolling. So the FAFSA covers your three primary resources. Over, if you're following that circle around it as if it's a clock, the private sources around 7 o'clock, the employers around 10 o'clock on the clock there. That has nothing to do with the FAFSA. So for instance, a Grand Rapids Community Foundation, I believe Newaygo County, it might actually just be called the Newaygo Community Foundation, I'm not sure. Out in Ottawa County and Holland area, there's the Holland Community Foundation. I think Grand Haven has something called the Tri-Cities. So various community foundations throughout Michigan have scholarships. Lake Michigan Credit Union has the HUT scholarship, and other banks and insurance companies have various scholarships. So that would be an example of private sources. Employers, sometimes parents or even students are working somewhere that get some sort of employee benefit. So I know that Meyer Corporation has a really good benefit for for employees who are attending college. Amazon has a program to assist their own employees for going to college to get a degree. So sometimes employers will offer that benefit. So even for a student who's 19, 20 years old and is now working at some place, they might be eligible for some of these benefits. So we always encourage people to check. Those sources like Grand Rapids Community Foundation or Amazon do not relate to the FAFSA. The FAFSA does not have a connection there. So the student would have to find those resources on their own. But that's where I'd say, yeah, use the website, use the internet for searches, but be careful and absolutely do not pay for a search. Some examples of federal aid. I have a little bit more information about student loans in just a couple of slides, so we'll talk about student loans more in a minute. But federal grants, the primary is the Pell Grant, and then there's something called the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. There's the student loans, work study. I'll talk more about third-party scholarships in just a second. But the federal grants, those are determined based on the FAFSA. So when a student fills out a FAFSA, that information is sent to the school that the student has on the FAFSA, and then it has a score or something called the expected family contribution, or sometimes simply referred to as the EFC. That it gets X amount of a Pell Grant. So a Pell Grant, we have there on the slide that Congress has not passed the budget. So we don't know what the maximum Pell Grant is for next year yet. But based on the score from the FAFSA, the student might get a maximum Pell Grant, or they might get a 50% or even a 35% Pell Grant based on that score from the FAFSA. And that, or maybe even zero Pell Grant, depending on what that number is. The higher the number is on the FAFSA, a maximum Pell, the higher that number goes, then the less a student will receive. That for $6,500 for this year, and that's where a student would no longer get a Pell Grant. So to answer the question in the chat, yes, we will have these slides available that get sent out. Student loans, I'll talk more about that in a minute. Oh, by the way, It was a award that's determined by the school. What I'm emphasizing for all these individual scholarships, they simply fill out the FAFSA, and then the schools take over and look at the different criteria, and they will award a submission process for those types of aid programs. Work study, I talked a little bit about work study already, so skipping to that last bullet point there about third-party scholarships. Look at the schools. There, I gave the link to the Grand Rapids Community Foundation. I gave some different ideas in just one slide earlier about different ways people could search. FastWeb.com, that's a scholarship. I don't know, it groups a lot of scholarships together. Students can apply for free, but FastWeb.com, like Twitter, like Facebook, like Instagram, they are all free to the user, which means they are doing advertising. So they're making their money somehow. And so they're making their money by selling targeted ads, similar to what happens with Facebook and others. So students can use search engines like this, but they simply should be very careful as to the type of information that they're putting out there. The state actually has a scholarship search engine as well. I tend to point students that direction instead of just going randomly on the internet. Michigan financial aid programs is based on a certain SAT score, but again, the student does not have to apply separately for that. The state gets the information from high schools as to what the SAT score is for a student, or maybe I'm not sure. Maybe they get the SAT score directly from College Board, but they get the FAFSA and they determine the eligibility. The same is true for the Michigan tuition grant if a student is going to go to a private nonprofit school. Tuition incentive program is for students who have received Medicaid coverage at some point between the ages of 9 and high school graduation, for a certain period of time. Again, the student does not, they used to, up to about 3 years ago, the student had to apply separately for TIP. They do not have to do that anymore. The state uses the FAFSA and their own records to inform schools as to whether or not a student is eligible. Students can, though, they contact the state if they have questions. They can contact the schools if they have questions. The one thing on the note, the first institution listed on the FAFSA will be considered the priority school. So here's an example. If a student lists 3 or 4 schools on the FAFSA, and let's say Grand Rapids Community College is first, that student goes up on Grand Rapids Community College's list of different eligible students. It will not go up on the second or third school. So if that student says, oh no, I'm actually going to go to Grand Valley, they would have to either change that on the FAFSA or they call the state to get the state to switch from Grand Rapids Community College over to Grand Valley, and then Grand Valley will get the scholarship information or the financial aid information from the state. One other thing, yeah, so I see a comment about TIP. One other thing that they have done with TIP recently, which is really, really good, they removed the limits. That there used to be a limit of like 24 credits per year that a student could get. Well, then over 2 years, they're short, right? Because an associate's degree takes 60 credits. So they would only get coverage for 48 credits in those 2 years. So the state removed that limit, and a student also can now be able to go full-time, 12 credits fall, winter, and if a school has a full summer semester like most do, they could go full-time in the summer if they chose to. So taking that application away is a huge, huge boost. We saw a significant increase in the number of eligible students because so many students were not taking that extra step. So remove the hurdle. The state already had the information. They had up to the FAFSA. They simply made the students eligible, and then they contacted the schools. So the other thing that the state is doing with TIP, before I move on to the next slide, is students have to prove they have a high school diploma. That information now comes from CEPI. So it used to be that colleges and universities had to collect high school diploma or proof of high school graduation from the students. So that was an additional burden on students. They had to fill out an application with the state and send their diplomas in or proof of high school graduation to the college or university. So the state removed the application, and they are now using CEPI data. So once your high school reports graduation information, that gets fed, of course, into CEPI. CEPI then sends that information over to the Student Scholarships and Grants Division, and that information then gets translated or transferred over to colleges and universities. So just at GRCC, we estimate that somewhere more than 90% of our students are covered by CEPI data. So some of the private schools that do not report, or some of the home schools that don't report high school graduation to CEPI, they would still have to provide that proof. But for most schools in the state of Michigan, CEPI data documents that the student has a high school diploma, and we do not have to get that. Programs, Future Educators, a new program, the achievement grants, I talk about in a little bit, Reconnect, Survivor grant, and so on. Again, the data, they have the information, they notify colleges of students who are eligible. Student loans, let's chat about student loans for just a bit. The direct student loan, and when I emphasize that, because especially when I'm talking to parents, because if a student walks into my office and says, maybe they declined a student loan, maybe they said, I don't want it 3 months ago. Now they walk into my office this afternoon, they say, I want a student loan. I have to give it to them. As long as they go through the paperwork, I have to give them, as long as they meet the eligibility requirements. I have zero contact. In fact, I am not allowed to contact the parent. The parents do not sign anything. It is directly with the student. And so I emphasize that to say, yes, we have to make sure that students are aware that they're taking out a loan. The maximum award for first year student, up to no interest is enrolled half-time or more in college. And therefore, the other 2,000 would be considered unsubsidized, and that's when interest does compound. Some students might not even see any subsidized loans because maybe they have a very high EFC, and therefore the full 5,500 is considered an unsubsidized loan. The student does not have control over that because it all comes out of the FAFSA and various calculations and other types of scholarships and grants the student might have. And then each college or university will calculate the student's eligibility first for a subsidized loan and then for an unsubsidized loan. The loan is split 50-50 over 2 semesters. So half of it is fall, half of it is winter. And if you go and take out a car loan, you look at the car, you see the price, you have a down payment potentially, you might have a trade-in, and then you say, all right, here's the total price of the car, here's my loan that I'm taking out, therefore, here's my monthly payment. And when you drive that car off the lot, it's done. You know what your monthly payment is for the next 4, 5, 6, however many years for that loan. Student loans are different because you take out only a portion every single semester. If you take out a loan, a student would say have $2,750 in fall semester, and emotionally they say, I can do that. And then in winter, they take out another $2,750. intellectually, they can add those two numbers together and get to 5,500, but emotionally, it's only 2,750 again. And they think, I can do that. Well, you do that a few semesters, all of a sudden you have a $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 in student loans. And a student in graduating looks back and goes, where'd this come from? I never took out $30,000 in a loan. No, they didn't. And yes, they did. They never took out a single loan for $30,000 like you might do a car loan. But they did take out $30,000 because they took out a little bit at a time. 2,750, maybe 4,000 another semester. And eventually it added up over 7, 8, 9 semesters. So that's where then that last bullet point under student loans, the direct student loan, students can track their borrowing on studentaid.gov. So when students sign up for the FAFSA and they are filling out the FAFSA, that same login on studentaid.gov gives them access to their complete borrowing history. And so we encourage students once a year at least, go out and just check how much have you borrowed? Is everything looking correct? Does it make sense? Do you see something? It's almost like checking your credit report. Is something look odd? Is something missing, or is something there that shouldn't be there? And then a student can see their total borrowing history. And it gives them repayment. It gives ideas, how much would it cost to repay this over 10 years, and different repayment options if they were to start repaying at that point. So studentaid.gov is a great website, not just for doing the FAFSA, but also for students to see their dashboard and track their borrowing history. So a couple more types of loans. Parent loans are often referred to as PLUS. It is a federal loan that goes directly to parents. So it's based on the parent, not the student. So students normally would access their loans first, and then a parent might step in and ask for a PLUS loan. The amount can vary. It could be $15,000, $20,000 per year, or whatever the amount is. Maybe a parent says, I only need $2,000, and so the amount can vary. There is an origination fee, 4% currently. So whatever if the student needs $10,000, they should add 4% to that, because the government's going to take a 4% fee simply for processing the loan. Alternative or private loans, like again, Lake Michigan Credit Union is one, PNC, Discover Loans. Oh, there are a few other banks that offer private loans. These are through a lending institution. Most colleges and universities have information on their website about alternative and private loans, but people do not apply through the FAFSA. They do not apply through the school. They contact a bank or lending institution directly and apply for a student loan. Not all banks do. I wouldn't even hazard to start listing ones that do, because I know I would miss some, but not all banks do student loans. So the best resource for students is, not all banks do private loans. So they would have to contact the school's website and see what information might be out there on the school's website. So that's a little bit about student loans. The main thing I want to emphasize is for students that it's up to them. Parents are not co-signing on anything, and it's just a portion at a time. And so the total amount sometimes can sneak up on students, which is why we emphasize them to use studentaid.gov as a dashboard. Now I'm going to move into, and I have a number of slides, I'd say a handful of slides that just give you screenshots. So as we get into some of these screenshots, I won't go into detail about the FAFSA. I just want to show screenshots so that people know what website they're on and kind of get a sense of what it's looking like. So how do they apply for financial aid? I've already talked about the FAFSA is where they start. So that's where they would start. They would start with the FAFSA on the web at studentaid.gov. A student needs a social security number. If a parent does not have a social security number, they enter all zeros on the FAFSA, and then they would have to print the signature page at the end and sign it because to electronically sign, you have to have a social security number. But it is entirely possible for a student to receive financial aid as long as the student is a citizen or an eligible non-citizen and they have a social security number, even if the parents do not have a social security number. There's no question on the FAFSA about parents in terms of their citizenship. There is question about residency. Are they a resident of the state of Michigan? But not about citizenship. They do ask, the FAFSA asks citizenship about the student though. To get things started, the student and one parent needs a federal student aid ID. That would be to electronically sign it. If a parent does not have a social security number, they would not be able to have a federal student aid ID. And so they would then have to, like I said, print the page at the end and hand sign it and mail it in. But if they have a social security number, then they can create this federal student aid ID, and then they can electronically sign it, and everything goes much, much quicker. Just kind of looking at the information. Oh, the second bullet under the federal student aid ID, the student and parent cannot use the same email address. They have to have separate email addresses and separate phone numbers. Honestly, most people today have their own email address. They don't really, this is probably an issue that's a legacy from 10, 15 years ago when email was still kind of growing in terms of its use. Well, maybe 20 years ago when it was growing in its use. But this is part of the security that the federal government has, and for password resets. So they have to have separate emails. And then, like I mentioned, if the parent has no social security number, they cannot actually have a federal student aid ID to electronically sign the FAFSA, but the student can still complete the FAFSA and potentially be eligible for federal and state aid. So these next few slides, I'm going to kind of go through them a little bit more quickly because this is more just screenshots. So when you get into creating an account for a federal student aid ID or FSA ID, you just get started, and this says, okay, you're going to need your social security number and email and a password. I'm sorry, an email and a phone. This is what that creating an account website looks like. This actually can take, like the slide says about the fourth bullet down, it can take 5 to 10 minutes because part of the process is to verify the phone number. So the federal government will send a text message to the phone number, and then they also verify the email address. So they'll send a code to the email so the student can verify that as well. Again, it's part of the security measures to make sure the student has a secure login. But this is what it looks like. And then the progress bar across the top does a nice job in terms of tracking, where the student is at. I say, when you see that little lower cloud on the right, help is here. If you follow the circles up to the left, it goes to a little question mark there. The question marks there are actually really helpful. They're contextualized to the specific field. So when you click on that question mark, it will say something to this extent that you must include your legal name that is on your Social Security card. That's how it matches. So sometimes people will have a mismatch and cannot create a federal student aid ID. That's because they may have used a name that is not the name that is actually listed on their Social Security card. So it's really good for students to have their card or at least view it before they create an ID so that they're using the legal name that would match with the Social Security Administration. Another screenshot. So here's the studentaid.gov website. I gave some of those deadlines, so I won't go over that again. But I just want people to see what it looks like so that when you get out there, it's not new and you say, okay, this looks familiar. so that you're not on the wrong website. Studentaid.gov is the website to use. So then a student would click on the FAFSA form, and then they would get this next page. And the first time they fill out the FAFSA for a given year, they would click Start Here. So that first button or rectangular button kind of in the middle. If they've already completed a FAFSA for next fall, then when they log in to make changes, then they would click the returning user. By the way, since I mentioned something about changes, the nice part about the FAFSA is you can make changes. So let's say a student made a mistake on the FAFSA. They answered questions about how much money they had in their checking account, and they accidentally wrote in too many zeros, and they wrote in $50,000. And they realized that that was wrong. It should have been $50 or maybe $5. They can log back into the FAFSA, go to that particular section of the FAFSA and make that correction. So that correction can be made by a student, or it can be made by somebody like myself at the college, as long as the student would provide information as to what the correct data should be. So that's the nice part about the FAFSA, is you can make corrections. It's not like a tax return, where once you send the tax return to the IRS, you have to do a full-blown amended return and all kinds of other processes. The FAFSA, you just log back in, you make the change. So once you click Start Here, and then you come to this page. I am the student, I am a parent filling out the student, I am a preparer. The preparer is almost never used. This might be a situation where a family maybe is working with an accountant, maybe mom or dad own some sort of business, so they have an accountant who does the books for them as part of a free service, emphasizing free because it's the free application for federal aid. So as part of that service, the tax preparer maybe would fill out the FAFSA for the family. That person would click, I am a preparer. Almost never happens. And actually, I have never seen it happen. I told you before, I've been in financial aid 30 years, almost 30 years. I've helped thousands of people fill out the FAFSA. I've never seen a situation where somebody should click that button. But I am the student, or I am a parent filling out a FAFSA. The nice part there is the questions change. So if you say, I am the student, then the question says, what is your name? What is your social security number? What school are you going to attend? And then when it gets to the parents, it says, what is your parent information? What's your parent name? What's your parent income? If the person clicks, I am the parent filling out the student form, all those questions flip. Then the questions say, what is your student's name? What is your student's address? What college is your student going to? And then when the parent is on the parent section, it says, what is your income? So the federal government has done a really, really good job of making those questions more specific to the person who's filling out the FAFSA, and therefore it's easier. You'll see fewer or less confusion on what to include. So once they say I am the student, or we could have clicked I'm the parent, but then you get to the login. This is really the point. It's kind of hard. Maybe I can do this. Yeah, where I just highlighted create an FSA ID. That's really the best way to go. So a student would go first to studentaid.gov, click on FAFSA, I am new, I am a student, and then they can create the ID here. It'll go to the Federal Student Aid ID website, they create the ID, and it brings them right back to the same page, and they log in to continue. That's the easiest way to get at the correct Federal Student Aid ID website. So again, I'm going to go back a few slides. Yeah, so the student comes to studentaid.gov, they click on FAFSA form, they click Start Here, I am the student, create an ID for the first time. Once they have an ID, they don't have to do it. I have two daughters who now, one is in her early 30s, one is in her late 20s. I have a Federal Student ID as a parent. When they filled out the FAFSA, I haven't used it in 6-7 years. But my ID still exists. I would just have to reactivate it. So if I was coming back in, I would just say, I am the parent, log in, retrieve my password. So then getting started, after you log in, it says, okay, which FAFSA do you want to work on? And for most of your students, since we're talking, I believe, primarily to high school, if not exclusively to high school, guidance counselors in this session, maybe some middle school, we'd be looking at the 23-24 FAFSA on the assumption that most of your students would be starting college in fall of 23. If anybody were to start in January of 23 or May of 23, they would actually do the FAFSA on the right, which is the 22-23 FAFSA. But once they click that button, then they create a save key. It's just a pin like you would use with your ATM card or something, or at an ATM machine. It's an added level of security. And then kind of get a checklist. Here's some information about the FAFSA. And then they're actually in the FAFSA. And that's what the FAFSA looks like. I cut out the header, the studentaid.gov, but it is as clean as that. They have a progress bar across the top. As you move along, it automatically saves. And the questions, you just keep continuing. And the help button is there next to each and every field. So if a student has a question, they can click on the help button. So the next slide shows green check marks. So in this particular slide, the student has completed everything. Every time a green check mark shows up, the FAFSA automatically saves it. So if the internet goes down, or if a student just says, I don't have information on my parents, I have to quit, they can do that. They can stop, save it, automatically saves. And when they log back into the FAFSA 2 days later, 2 weeks later, 2 months later, when they log back in, it'll pick up right where they left off. It's a really nice feature there. Also, I've seen people complete the FAFSA on a smartphone, so they can do that. And the same thing will happen if they're on a Chromebook and then they move to some other computer and then they pick it up on their smartphone. It all picks up right where the student left off. This particular slide just shows that the student has completed everything. Student financial information was not requested because of some information that already existed with the parents. Based on the questions, based on the answers to some of those questions on their parent, this particular student was not required to submit any student financial information. So it went right to the signature page. So the student would read through the information and then they click, well, in this case, I, Testi Perez, agree that I have filled out this form to the best of my knowledge. They click continue and they have electronically signed the FAFSA. So now if a student has already signed the FAFSA, then it goes to the parent and then the parent can sign it. If they do not have a login, so let's say the student has a login, but the parent does not, they would click on this right here. Choose another way to sign. So if a parent does not, there we go. If a parent does not have a social security number, cannot create a federal student aid ID, they would choose another way to sign that will give them the option to print the signature page. They print it, the one-page sheet of paper, all the information on one page, they print it, student signs it, parent signs it, and they send it in to the address that's on that document. IRS data retrieval. So I'll just mention here that there is an option on the FAFSA, and we're very close to the end of this just initial session here on FAFSA. You have to provide financial information. One option is to do IRS data retrieval. And so a student would say, I'm going to do IRS data retrieval. They fill out, they answer certain questions, and then the IRS will send the data directly to the FAFSA, and I think it's like 6 or 7 just data points. It's not the entire tax return. It's just a few data points out of the return, and they fill out the FAFSA. They fill in the FAFSA with that information. It doesn't always work. It does for a number of students, but it might not for some, especially if they change their address or something like that, or they don't remember specific information about about their taxes from a couple years ago. So if they have their tax return, they can always manually enter the information. It's not a problem. They can manually enter it. It's just that doing the data retrieval makes it automatic and is just a little bit easier. And that pretty much, that comes to the end. Where's my mouse? That comes to the end to the FAFSA portion of it. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and come on back. So that's timeline, that's FAFSA. I'm kind of looking through questions. I don't see any questions. So I think I'd say this is a good time for like a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
What do you think, Samantha?
Absolutely. So does anyone feel free again to put those in the chat, or you can go ahead and, raise your hand or speak now if you have any questions about this first part, and then we'll take a quick break and we'll come back for more strategies to work, with students and with parents on this. But any questions about this first portion? Is there an income requirement for TIP?
No, it's based on Medicaid. Did they receive Medicaid during that basically middle school, high school? They do have to do the FAFSA though.
How much time does the FAFSA typically take to complete?
The total time, if you include the creating the federal student ID, it could be like 40 to 60 minutes the first time they do it. And that's because the ID itself is going to take 5 to 10 minutes, possibly 10 minutes just for the student. And then once they did it, maybe another 5, 6 minutes to create it for the parent. But yeah, a good 40, 45, maybe even 60 minutes the first time. The next time, the next year, I've seen people get it done in less than 10 minutes because they have the ID, they know what the process is, and it goes much quicker.
I know one thing that I've heard from a few people and from parents is, people are like, oh, I don't want to give my social security number, but this studentaid.gov is a federal website, correct? So, yes. I mean, the federal government already has your social security number. So it's, a safe website to put that in.
And the government, the federal government, now I say federal, the U.S. Department of Education is very clear about parents putting in zeros for social security number. They do not report that anywhere. It is just for the FAFSA. So if somebody says, I don't have a social security number, I don't want to alert, well, let's just take a real negative approach. I do not want to alert DHS or some other organization like that. Filling out the FAFSA, the Department of Education does not share that information anywhere. However, with that said, I definitely can understand a family's reluctance.
Great. And I know for me, one thing I just want to reiterate, and this is again something I hear a lot, is that, a lot of students are like, oh, I don't need to fill out the FAFSA. I'm not, going to apply for loans or something like that. But again, like you mentioned, it is used for, those college scholarships as well. So even if students are not looking to take out loans, it's really important that they still fill it out so that the college can get information to be able to
and the state
give out those loans. Yeah.
I mean, well, and the other thing too is, and I kind of emphasized the negative side of loans earlier. Doing the FAFSA does not require a student to take out a loan. It simply opens the opportunity.
Great. Well, if anyone does have any more questions, feel free to put those in the chat, but we will take about a 5-minute break here. Let's say around 10:02-ish, maybe 6-minute break. So, go ahead and take a quick little break. And then, like I said, we'll come back to talk more about specific strategies with working with students and parents. All right, welcome back, everyone. I just wanted to give a couple quick reminders, and I know we had several people that hopped on late. So just a reminder that in order to get credit, make sure your name on Zoom matches, or at least closely matches, the name that you registered with, just so we can make sure to match those up. And you will receive a recording as well as a copy of the slides after as well. All right, and I'll turn it back over to David.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a few minutes to talk about some different resources for informing students and parents. Let me get to that section on the slides. And then we're also going to hopefully have some time for breakout sessions into the different breakout rooms. Hopefully that works. and give you a chance to kind of share with each other as to maybe what you've tried or different ideas that you might be thinking as you go forward. So we're kind of doing just looking at my timeline here about strategies for informing parents and students, and then a total of about a half hour. So maybe the breakout rooms would be about 10 minutes long. And then strategies for FAFSA completion, approximately the same. So real quick with a screen share. Just a minute, just kind of get my screen set up here. Okay. So in terms of strategies, there are both the state and the federal governments both have some really good resources. So I just wanted to show you these slides a minute, just because the websites that I'm going to show you are linked in the presentation. So the state of Michigan has various web resources, general information. They have some virtual financial aid nights that goes into a lot more detail than what I have done just during this session this morning. And then they have some information on, excuse me, on filing a FAFSA and which FAFSA to complete in that. So that's with the state. And we'll go to these websites here in just a minute. The federal website has checklists that I personally think are really interesting. And it's not that everybody should use 100% of the checklist, but they do definitely give a lot of helpful resources. And you'll see that they have checklists even for going down to middle school and even elementary school as to what you can do at a school to help students start thinking about college or thinking about what happens once they're out of school, even in middle school or elementary school. And then the federal government has Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, where they have a lot of videos out there. For instance, I know that the federal, I think it's on their YouTube channel, they have a good video on how to create a federal student aid ID that somebody can walk through and see all of that. Well, all right, we'll come to that in a minute. So let me stop this particular screen share and I'll show you the other for the websites. So these are the websites that I linked to in the presentation. So this first one is the the state of Michigan website. So michigan.gov /my student aid. And then I clicked on, so when you go to My Student Aid, you just come to this general website, and then I clicked on Student and Families and get to this. And so they have a lot of information right there in terms of different programs, what FAFSA should I file, different types of programs, or specific like about TIP. They have a quick link since that's a very well-utilized program. And then a lot of just different information that is available to parents. So this website has a lot of really good information. The call center is there to help. They will help primarily with questions about the state programs, not so much about the FAFSA per se. If you have questions about the FAFSA, that's where people could call school or actually directly to the federal government. Another website that the state of Michigan has are virtual financial aid nights. So here are some that are coming up. So they do offer these websites. Again, they are free to the public, so anybody could register and kind of walk through these presentations from the state of Michigan. And then here's some information that the state has in terms of what FAFSA do they file. Has this kind of guideline in terms of what, what dates and what kind of leads to what tax information has to get included on the FAFSA. So the FAFSA for next fall, for fall of 23, that FAFSA uses the 2021 tax information. So that is the links for the state and the various resources that the state has. In terms of the federal website, so here's the studentaid.gov website. So before I was circling the FAFSA form, complete the FAFSA, I'm just going to quickly click on a couple of things so you can see, there's the start here I showed you, and then you start walking through. All right, now I'm going to go back to the checklist because that's really what I wanted to show you. Checklist. So on this resource from the federal government, you can see they have different checklists for high school, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. Up here, they have checklists for elementary school and middle school, and they have different types of checklists. So just by way of example, I already clicked on the grade 12. So this then is the checklist for a grade 12 student as to what to do and how they can get ready for going on to college or university after they graduate from high school. So this is just a little checklist for the student, and then they, what to do in the fall semester, what to do in spring, and then they even give some information to parents as to what parents can do to help their student get ready to go to college. And this is just an example of the 11th grade checklist. So the federal government is actually encouraging students to create a federal student AID even before they do the FAFSA, which is fine because once it's created, excuse me, and people can use it. They just might have to reset their password. But it's the same type of checklist where they have some ideas for the student and then some information for the parent. I find the information on these checklists to be very helpful because it generates different ideas. So for instance, creating a federal student aid ID early instead of waiting until they do the FAFSA is an option that schools could promote and get that information out to students and parents ahead of time. I wanted to go back. Somebody had asked a question about tip and need. So when you're on the state website, Michigan State Aid Programs, somebody could click, and this again could be a resource to parents. Excuse me. And once they click on programs, they can go through and get information about different types of programs. And so here are all the various programs. For instance, the new Michigan Achievement Scholarship is listed right here. And the information about that a student can get $2,750 if they attend a community college, up to $5,500 if they attend a public university, $4,000 if they attend a private nonprofit school. There aren't many more details than that yet in terms of how this all gets calculated, because some of it is first, some of it's last, but people can go out there and start getting information. So during the break, I clicked on Michigan Competitive Scholarship. So here's an example of all the information. So somebody could read about all of that, but notice here, demonstrate financial need. So earlier somebody said, does somebody have to be needy to get tipped? So the competitive scholarship says demonstrate financial need. So there's a specific calculation that schools have to do to determine if the student has need or is a needy student for the competitive scholarship. When you just click on the TIP program, it doesn't say demonstrate financial need anywhere. And so that's where I'm saying, no, it's not need-based, it's based on Medicaid. And so here is that student must have had Medicaid coverage. They have to fill out the FAFSA, have to have a high school diploma prior to age 20, and then some of the other requirements, but it does not say demonstrate financial need, whereas the competitive scholarship does say that. So that's the kind of information that parents can get. Honestly, it's more information than they probably need because the state determines the eligibility and they send it directly to us, to the schools, I mean. So going back to the family, so my student aid, or michigan.gov/my student aid, and then they click on students and families and they get all this information. The state has the virtual financial aid nights that anybody can register for, and more information. And then I like a lot of the ideas, like I said, that are created in these checklists by the federal government. So that was really quick. that was less time than I thought I was going to take on that section. So
no problem. Well, so now we will spend some time in breakout rooms. Let me open those up. And so this is just time for you to share with each other things that you've done in the past, or ideas that maybe you have and kind of want to talk through. So we'll probably give you about 10-ish minutes. Then we'll come back and then hopefully a couple people will share with the group. So I will go ahead and open those up. All right, and I'm going to set those I'll do for 12 minutes because there's about 6 people in each. So you have a couple of minutes to share. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open those again. This is just time for you all to share with each other. And David, did you want to join the room? So I can put you in one if you'd like. You don't have to. Okay.
No, that's fine. They can let them just chat.
Perfect. All right, looks like we've got one more room still to come back. They'll be kicked out in 5 seconds. So right, I think we're all back now. Sorry, room 5, for kicking you out there. Hopefully we're having a good conversation. Does anyone want to share? A couple of people want to share some of the ideas you talked about in your group? You can go ahead and raise your hand, or you can just speak, whatever is better for you.
Okay, I'll be brave and I'll go.
Thank you, Carrie.
You're welcome. Good morning. I think it's still morning. Yes. Okay. So, was in a group with lovely ladies that we all had a great convo. So I work for an early middle college in the Dearborn Public School District, and we were just basically sharing what we do in terms of sharing information about FAFSA. In the beginning of the year, what I do at my school with my partners, we have college application seminars for the we call them the 13th year because it's an early middle college, so they do that 5th year. And we just, walk them through filling out the FAFSA, the MISSG website, and, encouraging them to fill out everything before March 1st, just to maximize, their award, and walk them through scholarship searches and not paying for scholarships, and just, put the information out there for them. And then, hopefully they follow through and they're not, in June and then or April or May, having a 911 moment. And we kind of talked about, you can't reach everybody, but post-COVID, it's been, if we're going to look at anything positive post-COVID, is that we have one in-person seminar where we share the information and put the information out there and just go over everything. And then we also do a couple online, which we appreciate the online format of today's session, because that's just the reality. Everyone's, doing their thing. And the important thing is us getting the information out there to parents and students and hoping that they follow through and, maximize their potential earning or eligibility. So that's pretty much it. We just kind of talked about what, we do at our individual schools, and this is very beneficial. I feel like I'm listening and multitasking at the same time, but there's, a lot of information that was shared today that was new to me that maybe I don't focus on. So I appreciate that you're going to be sharing this after today, because I kind of feel like I do want to go back and touch on what was shared so that maybe I could implement more things moving forward. So it's been beneficial. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. I did also want to share before David jumps into our last section. Let me see if I can share. Which screen is it? This one. So hopefully it's on the right one. Are you seeing the Kent ISD website right now? That was showing. Okay, perfect. So I did want to let you know and I'll send the link directly to this, but on our website, we have our framework that we've mentioned in many other professional development workshops, but we have a grade band for grades 9 through 12. And in that we have a paying for college section. And so we do have some additional resources here about, just specific information, as well as some ideas on how to use this with students and parents as well. So I'll include that link when I send out the recording in the slides as well. All right, but now I'm going to pass it over to David to talk about our last section. So we're going to talk a little bit more about strategies for completion.
Thank you. And I was glad to see that military on your list, because I forgot about that piece of it with, the extension after 9/11 of military benefits to dependents and under certain circumstances and all of that. So that's another resource that people can check out. But so strategies for FAFSA completion, a lot of these actually I've picked up from people like yourself as I've gone to various schools and talked with people and seen. So let me do this quick last screen share. And here are just some things that I have seen various high schools do, which I think really works out. So one of the things that they've done is they work either with juniors in the spring of their junior year, or with seniors in fall semester. They have the student create a federal student aid ID during school, during a session, one of their class sessions. And I thought that was a great option, because that gets the students into it. They're not doing anything with the FAFSA. They might actually even start the FAFSA a little bit just to kind of get introduced to it. And then they do a FAFSA night later when the parents can come. But for a student to create their federal student aid ID, that's not sharing any information that the parents might have or is unique to the parents. I thought that was really a good way to get things started, because then when they had a FAFSA night with the parents, we could go directly to the FAFSA. And it does give them that familiar feel that they've been here before. I think that's the thing that I find with most people is it's a federal form. And so filling out a federal form, or filling out a form in general, even if it's I used card loans before, so let's say that a car loan or something, there's a certain amount of anxiety. It's like, if I fill it out wrong, am I going to miss out on information or miss out on opportunity? So, giving some exposure to it and letting students see it ahead of time by doing the Federal Student ID, I think is a good idea. A lot of schools, that next one down in terms of hosting a FAFSA completion event, a lot of schools already do that. I've already gone out to I think like 12, 15 schools, and my team has done other schools. Just GRCC in general, I think we've maybe done, we've gone out to 25 to 30 schools total. And other colleges do that. Grand Valley in the area, I believe that Lake West Shore and Lakeshore Community Colleges, the various colleges and universities host FAFSA events. So a lot of them can help. East Kentwood down in the Grand Rapids area, they have a FAFSA night. They had one last week, and that was just pure FAFSA completion. And so they had a handful of people from various colleges who came to help students complete it. The other thing is students can always contact the college they plan to attend. I mentioned that earlier, and maybe that was something that didn't really click in your brain as I was going through that, but colleges are required to provide assistance. That's part of the requirement of being able to participate in federal student aid. We have to assist students if they have questions. Now, a lot of that assistance is on websites and through videos and things like that, but students can always contact the college to ask questions. We actually have, and I know that most colleges will have a way that students could even come on campus and do a FAFSA if they need access to a computer. All right, next slide. Here we go. Some other strategies, the short videos on the federal YouTube channel. I've looked through those before, and I find them to be pretty helpful. I don't think that they're really missing a lot of information. They're definitely geared towards the students or towards the parent, and it really gives them a good overview of the various process. And most of the videos are relatively short. They're not like 40 minutes long or something. They're maybe like 5-10 minutes or so. And again, it's to help students become comfortable. So I think even maybe if there's an opportunity to take a few minutes, say, all right, here's how you create a federal student aid ID, and you show that video, might be helpful. Let me get into the new FAFSA a minute, because everything I've talked about so far is for the current one, because that's what we're working with. Next year, so October 1 of 2023, the new FAFSA rolls out. It in general is going to be much easier for students to complete. The government is claiming that they're going to be cutting the number of questions by a third or so, maybe even more. And so it should be a lot easier for students to complete. It's going to have a direct data exchange between the IRS and the Department of Education. So earlier I said about the data retrieval, where a student clicks on a button, they fill out information and like 6-7 questions, and then the IRS will send the information back into their FAFSA. In the new FAFSA, there's a direct exchange. The Social Security number will be used by the IRS to find the tax information. It'll automatically be imported. At least that's what the Department of Education is telling us. We'll see how that works out when they get into it. The other thing with student eligibility is it's going to be based more on, or it's going to be based directly on federal poverty guidelines. So depending on the student's family situation, let's say a single parent with 2 children in the household, federal poverty guidelines, whatever that number is, I don't know, $20,000, whatever that poverty number is, then the Pell Grant would be based on, let's say, 200% or 225% of poverty. And the percentages are different. And so a student might get 1 EFC this year based on the FAFSA, and it might look very different next year. GRCC has done some calculation with a resource from our state association, or I'm sorry, our National Financial Aid Association. And we've calculated that a lot more students at GRCC are going to qualify for Pell under the new calculation, that we're going to see an increase by about a third of students, a third more students getting some sort of Pell grant. So the new FAFSA, when it comes out, is going to be very different, but for students who have never done a FAFSA before, they won't know the difference, but it will make a difference for people like myself, but also for you as guidance counselors, because you will have been used to seeing a FAFSA one way, and it'll be a new FAFSA a year from now. From everything we're hearing from the federal government, it's the same website, studentaid.gov. It's the same login process. It's just that the FAFSA itself is changing. So those are just some general ideas that I've picked up from other schools about having them do a federal student aid ID during the school day. Showing them some of the videos, like I mentioned here. I have a link to the federal YouTube channel earlier in the presentation. And so those are some things that I have seen people utilize to get students to complete the FAFSA. I know that there's one school in the Grand Rapids Public School System, there may be more, but I know of one for sure that requires all their seniors to fill out a FAFSA. I don't know what the rules are in high school, let's say. So I don't know if that's something doable in your school setting, but I know of at least one high school in the Grand Rapids Public Schools that does require it. So those are just some ideas I've picked up from talking to various people like yourselves at different high schools.
Yeah, and sorry. So now, again, just want to give you an opportunity to share, and this time we won't go into breakout rooms. We can just stay here. So even if it's some of those ideas that David shared, in terms of doing a FAFSA night or completion event or something, what has been successful at your schools that you might share with others? I know a big thing I'm hearing from a lot of schools is in this kind of not quite post-COVID world, a lot of people are saying that they're zoomed out, but then in-person attendance has still been a little difficult because it's hard to get people to come back at night, and parents and students. So I've heard that more people are finding success with some of those Zoom events still. But anything anyone has done that you found to be successful?
We've actually done a Zoom night at Caledonia High School, and we actually did a survey of our community and asked them if they wanted in person or if they wanted Zoom. And the majority of them, probably 75%, wanted to do Zoom. So we found pretty good success with that in terms of kids getting it done. And we do meet with all our seniors individually in September, and we kind of run through that a little bit with them. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And again, it's just, I love, survey your population to see what they, say they want, because we are seeing, again, a lot of people are preferring to stay on Zoom. Again, and a lot of it is just, trying to get people to come back at night and things. So we're finding a lot of success with that. Anyone else have anything different maybe that you've been able to do or that you found successful? I think a big thing for me, and I can remember even as a student who was applying to colleges, and especially as a first gen student, I had absolutely no idea what the FAFSA entailed or what I needed, and it's really easy to get discouraged and to just kind of stop doing it. So David, I'm hoping you'll share your next slide as well, that you had. I know a few of my schools I work with have this, but some type of completion checklist for students that shows, these are the documents that you're going to need to be able to do this. I know for me, like I didn't want to ask my parents for their information, but obviously you have to have their tax information to be able to do it. So just giving them that idea up front of what they're going to need to help with completion can be really, really helpful. And I know, like I said, a couple of schools I work with just have a pretty simple document with these things listed out just in their counseling office and available.
Yeah, and in a little bit, I'll do those last couple of slides. So yeah, I
Perfect.
will show that. Mhm.
Awesome. And then I know David mentioned this as well, in terms of those completion events. I have heard from many college reps that they are absolutely willing to come and help with those as well. So if you do something in person, whether it's at, during the day or at night, there definitely are people that are willing and available to help with that. So it's not just falling on, your staff of 3 counselors for 500 students or whatever you have. So definitely people available that can help you with that as well. All right. Any other ideas anyone wants to share before we jump into our last couple of slides, and then we'll have, a few more minutes at the very end for some more questions. All right. Well, go ahead then, David.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing that I spend a lot of time doing, you've heard me kind of do this already today, is I try to take as much as possible, reduce the anxiety level. That by showing screen slides, by giving the checklist, by doing some things like that, it's like I try to say it's okay. When I'm at a FAFSA event, I spend a decent amount of time probably with each family I help. At some point in the conversation, I'll say, oh yeah, you're at this stage here. Okay, this is normal. I try to emphasize that, they're going through a process and I've seen it before. It's not so much that I've seen it. It's that, okay, they're doing the right thing because they're concerned that if they do something wrong, it'll mess up their financial aid. That's why I try to emphasize, nope, you can make changes, or there might be some things that the school would change on your behalf. I'll talk about a couple of those things in just a second. But yeah, I try to take the anxiety out. And the checklist is one idea. So we'll start with this.
And David, along with that point, I love what you just said there about, trying to reduce anxiety and you really can't mess things up. I know I was speaking to another financial aid rep who said really the worst thing that can happen is they ask for some additional verification. And that doesn't mean you're in trouble or anything. It might be that, numbers didn't line up, like you said earlier, like you put, that you have $50,000 in the bank, but then your family income was way lower. So, things
Right.
like that, just making sure that they line up. So verification is not the end of the world and doesn't mean you're in trouble, but that's really kind of like the worst that can happen. You really can't mess it up.
Right. Yeah. And it might be something that the student cannot correct. And so then the school would step in and assist. And because the school can actually make changes on practically every element of the FAFSA with documentation from the student. So the verification. So one thing I do share with families sometimes as well when they ask questions is yeah, 1 out of every 10 FAFSAs currently, it used to be as high as 20%, but now it's about 10%. So 1 out of every 10 FAFSAs is selected by the federal government to provide additional documentation. That's not one of my slides. It's just something that with just you using the word verification, it triggered my brain. There are something around 650 to 700,000 FAFSAs filled out in the state of Michigan each year. And if 1 out of every 10 of them is selected for additional documentation or verification, that's 65,000 families that have to do that. That family didn't do anything wrong. They filled out the FAFSA. They just fell within whatever algorithm, whatever selection process the government does to say, okay, you need to provide some additional documentation. Families don't do that ahead of time. They simply fill out the FAFSA, they submit it, but then the school will contact the family and say, okay, you need to, your FAFSA says you have to provide this additional documentation. So one of the things I did, this FAFSA checklist, what are some of the key items that you would need in order to complete the FAFSA? It's a little bit like a grocery list, so it's just, I took it from from that federal website about, here are some things you need to know when you're ready to fill out the FAFSA. So filling out the FAFSA for next fall for 23-24, you would need a federal student ID and password for a student for the student and one parent, only one parent. So even if two parents are on the FAFSA because the parents are married, only one parent is required to sign. So you would need that. 2021 tax returns, federal tax returns, not state of Michigan, although often families will have federal, state, and local if needed, if required. They would have all those tax returns together, and then, but they need the information from the federal return. Social security cards, that's to make sure the names line up. Driver's license is used by the state of Michigan. It does not change a student's eligibility for federal aid, but the state of Michigan uses that for part of their tracking. If a student is an eligible non-citizen, so they have an alien registration or a permanent resident card or a so-called green card, then they would need that number as well. And then some families would require bank account balances and other information. The FAFSA actually tells you if you need that. So when a family starts filling it out and they say, we have a family of 5, let's say it's a married parents with 3 children, family of 5, and they have an income, maybe a certain income level. And then the FAFSA will say, based on the answers to the question, you do not have to provide additional information. Do you want to skip it? Yeah, if the government is telling you to skip some questions, skip them. And then those students would not have to add in those additional data points. Some families would have to include it, but some are able to skip. So it's going backwards. Last, I mentioned about special circumstances or situations that change because they're using tax information from 2 years earlier. So for fall of 2023, the tax information on the FAFSA is from tax year 2021. So it's 2 years prior to when the student actually enrolled. Well, let's face it, in 2 years, everything could change. So much could change for that student. Those are generally referred to as special circumstances, sometimes called dependency override, sometimes called professional judgment. There's schools use different phrases like that. And excuse me, this is an example of some of the more common ones. So what happens is a student would fill out the FAFSA the way the FAFSA tells you to. So they fill it out with 2021 tax information, submit it, and then it goes to the school. And then the student would contact the school and say, okay, I fill out the FAFSA the way I was supposed to, but it's not reality. My dad no longer has that job. He's on unemployment. So there was a loss of income or loss of employment, or my mom and dad got a divorce. So back in 2021, they had this joint income, but now they're divorced, or maybe there was a death in the family, or maybe there's a situation where there's a disruption in the family, so the student can no longer be with their parent, and so they're on their own. There's a way for a student to go through that and to be declared for FAFSA purposes, independent of their parents, and then parent information is not included. So the student would fill out the FAFSA the way the FAFSA says to. And then they contact the school afterwards and say, okay, the FAFSA does not reflect my current reality. And each school would then walk a student through the process and get the additional documentation needed to make changes on the FAFSA for the student on the student's behalf, and potentially make them eligible for different types of federal and even potentially state financial aid programs. So. But those are the different types of circumstances. There might be some medical expenses that are not covered by insurance. And each school has its option as to what they cover or what they would include or not. Most schools would definitely include the bottom 3 in these 5 clouds that I have, like a death of a spouse or a parent, loss of employment, or a divorce in the family, or some other type of disruption in the family or the family's income. Those top 2, it's an option. Some schools include it, not all do. So you'd have to contact the individual school to see if they do take those into account. But it's, from what I know, of the schools I know in like West Michigan here, but even including like Michigan State, University of Michigan, and some of our, our public universities, Western and so on, Central, Ferris, they would all do death of a parent or spouse, loss of employment, divorce, a separation between parent and child, some of these types of situations that are significant disruptions in a student's life or in the life of the family or in their income. But again, I know I've said this probably already 10 times, but one last time, they fill out the FAFSA with 2021 tax information. And after that's submitted, then they contact the college or university and say, that's not true anymore. Is there a way I can submit an appeal for special circumstances or a review of my financial aid eligibility? And then that's my final slide. So questions, here's the contact information for the general financial aid office, the phone number and the email. We do even do videos with families if they request it. More often than not, we can help a lot of people right through the phone. And of course, we're open from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, for students to come on campus if they have the opportunity. And then my contact information. So if you think of a question afterwards or have some follow-up, you can give me a call or send me an email, and I'll get the answer for you or point you in the right direction. So, and that,
Yeah, please feel free to put any final questions in the chat, or again, you can just share those. But thank you so much, David, for sharing your expertise on this subject. There's so much good information. And again, you will get those slides, which has everything linked in it, as well as the recording. Any final questions? Lots of thank yous coming in the chat. Not seeing any questions. And again, you do have David's contact information as well as mine if you have any questions. All right, not seeing any questions. So everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thanks again, David.
Yep, you're welcome. And thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.